Week 3 of VCT Americas is about to start, and whether you watched last week's games, were too busy, or perhaps you just didn't have 4 hours to listen to Plat Chat, this video is for you, as I will recap last week's games, so you can go into this week ready and understanding of where each team stands. With just 3 weeks left until playoffs, and many upsets already in the first 2 weeks, Americas is shaping up to be very interesting this year, as though some teams are outperforming expectations, others have fallen a little flat. That said, most teams still feel like they're in with a chance of playoffs, making this week's games particularly exciting. Americas began with C9 vs Envy, a game that started with a banger first map, with it being a close back and forth between the two teams. Both teams just taking their gloves off and scrapping. This map relied on hero plays right up until the final round, where Zelsis of all players ended the map with a 3k. Map 2 was different though, as this is where the stomp began. C9 looked really uncomfortable with their comp, as despite running a double initiator, they struggled to scale and take space on attack. And this must be reiterated, because it is a very important point. A pro team with 3 different flashes, 2 different drones, and Tejo missiles struggled to take space on attack. That is unacceptable at this level, and it is no surprise that they lost the map. Map 3 continued this trend, with C9 looking really uncomfortable with Haven. The only difference on this map was that Oxy popped off and got 27 kills. That is the only reason they made it to 13-9. They were just unable to punish Envy's aggression, which is something that is surprising, because they have the tools to re-clear space. Overall, C9 didn't really show anything good this week, and with their performance last week on top of that, I just don't see them doing anything this stage and making playoffs, especially as they should have been favoured in both their previous matches, which they lost, despite Oxy being the ACS leader in Stage 1 right now. As for Envy, they look to be rapidly improving as a team, with Exeter looking much better on the Phoenix, and Demon 1 able to take over on the Chamber. That said, they may struggle to make playoffs, as they are yet to play MIBR, Lev, or G2, all of which should be the toughest matches in their group. Though with how G2 have looked recently, it is still possible. Furia and EG were next, and this game started off with the news that Furia's coach couldn't make it as he was getting hand surgery. This may have affected their mental, as they did lose map 1, in a game they were extremely favoured in. That said, EG also came in with an amazing game plan that seemed to take advantage of all the weaknesses in Furia's playstyle, and even then, it required Digizine to drag it over the line in OT. The second map seemed to conform more with our expectations of this game, as Furia looked to completely dominate EG with their comp. In fact, it wasn't just their comp that was giving EG issues, it was their own comp, as Okeanos looked very uncomfortable on the waylay, often refracting in odd places and not dashing out when he should. The other notable thing was that the Killjoy ults looked terrible on this game from EG, and they were very heavily punished for that. Map 3 was an interesting showcase of the strength of a Vice against a solo Neon comp, as both teams struggled to attack on Lotus, a map known for its strong attacking side, with Furia winning out as they seem to be just the better team. Overall, though Furia did have a bad start, they were playing without their coach, and that could have affected their mental. Overall, I'm still really looking forward to their match against Crew this week, as it looks to be a banger of a game with 2 of the America's top teams. As for EG, this is a tough loss, as they seem to have caught Furia off guard on both Haven and Lotus, making them close maps. These were the kind of maps that an upset team like EG needed to close out if they were going to make playoffs. That said, a playoffs run is still possible if they beat Sen this week. G2 vs Lev was a match between the new and the old. G2, the old guard of Americas, and Lev, a team of young guns aiming their way to the top. Map 1 was a struggle for Lev, as they were running Neon Chamber, which struggled to take space on attack, especially against Babybay's Vice play, which is a natural counter to a solo Neon comp. Maps 2 and 3, however, played out very similarly to each other, both maps being decided by 2 rounds, with both first halves ending 6-6. Both teams also displayed their different styles on both these maps, with Lev opting into the double duelist and G2 opting for their Raise Vice, with oddly enough G2 picking Harbour on Split over Viper. That said, both were exciting maps that required hero plays from both teams to get them close to and eventually over the line for Lev. Lev's next game is against Envy, and I would say they are strong favourites to win. Personally, I hope they opt more into the double duelist with Sato and Spike, rather than running Chamber, as I think Spike's Neon is really fun to watch, and I think it gives them the best chance of winning against Vice comps, which seem to be so prevalent in Americas. As for G2, they still look like they're struggling post-Santiago, and I don't know if it's the lack of practice or just difficult competition, but they are clearly no longer the top dogs in Americas. What concerns me the most, though, is that they are opting into Harbour over Viper, a read that no one else seems to have, and I just haven't seen the value either, as they haven't cooked up anything particularly interesting or unique with their kit. On top of that, on maps like Breeze and Split, you really miss the Viper, and you would think that with Leaf on your team, you would run it. Or at least run it Viper Harbour on Breeze, because that map really struggles to be played without a Viper. That said, they have faced the strongest two teams in their group, and should be able to win out the remaining games and be safe in their run for playoffs. The next game in Americas felt like it was a foregone conclusion from the start, as you have MRBR, a team with Zekken and Aspas, who are at minimum top 5 duelists in the region, with 3 other shooters against a Loud team which struggled week 1 against a dysfunctional Envy, despite their star player Luxo popping off. At the start of Haven, it went exactly the way we expected, with MIBR taking a dominant 9-3 in the first half. They then faltered a little on attack, with Loud winning pistol and getting a couple of clutches to end the map 10 rounds to 13. This may have given some viewers hope for the next map, but that hope quickly died as Aspas on Zekken on double dive Raise Neon looked much better than their Jet Phoenix Haven comp and won a dominant 10-2 attack side on Split, with Zekken's Neon being so good at taking space for Aspas to follow up on and clean up. This duo looked unstoppable, and exactly how you would have dreamed it when this team was first put together. Overall, this game was so one-sided that you really couldn't say much about MIBR, other than perhaps that they should run double dive instead of Phoenix Jet, as the double entry seemed to fit their roster better. But with an easy match against C9 this week, they have room for experimentation with a few of their comps. As for Loud, this team lacks any real hope of making it to London, but can definitely still make playoffs as if they beat C9 next week. NRG vs Crew was a much anticipated match, as after their performance against Sentinels last week, Crew were looking like a strong team in Americas, and NRG was set up to test them. Crew are seemingly playing with a chip on their shoulder after having missed kickoff due to visa issues, and came into the game swinging, securing a 2-0 victory against last year's champs winners. The first map was Lotus, and NRG seemed to struggle on attack, getting only 5 rounds. But the most important thing about this game was on Crew's attack, as on round 19 and 20, they won back-to-back clutches, which really helped them close out this close game. On map 2, Madder's Neon was hard punished, especially as he often dropped guns for his teammates to play with, opting into shotguns instead, which didn't work for him as he looked uncomfortable with both his pathing and ability. That said, it wasn't just the game plan from NRG that made it hard for him. Crew seemed to specifically be targeting him with their protocols, punishing him and killing him, knowing that NRG would struggle to take space without him. He ended up the first half with 0-6 in first bloods. Overall, Crew have looked dominant in both their games so far. Les and Sadak especially have looked revived since they've returned to the Americas from EMEA. This team is a shoo-in for playoffs, and this week's match against Furia is set up to be a banger of a game. As for NRG, I am concerned about how this team looks, as they no longer look to be a contender for the top spot in Americas. Kiko in particular seems to be struggling to reach his form from last year, or even his form from kickoff. That said, they have now played their 2 hardest games in the group, and should win this week's match against 100 Thieves, who have not looked particularly strong. The classic Valorant org rivalry, 100 Thieves versus Sentinels, closed out this week's games. But with the record being 14-3 in favour of Sen, you might argue it's a bit of a one-sided rivalry. And with Nadeshot having switched sides to coach for Sentinels, it seems like everything is in favour of Sen nowadays. However, this game was a banger both in and out of the server, as not only was it crucial for Sen's playoffs hopes, it was also crucial for them proving that their mid-season roster change was worth it. And even though I was a doubter, I have to say they looked good against 100 Thieves. Despite the 13-10 scoreline, 100 Thieves never felt like they had a chance on map 1, as they relied on winning 3 coin flip 1v1 clutches and 1 1v2 clutch, and still didn't manage to close out the map. Fittingly, as the last map, map 2 was the best map of the week, with a banger 19-17 going in favour of Sentinels, with both teams' Vipers breaking the 30 kill barrier. Surprisingly, both teams opted into Sage over Vice or Double Duelist, a somewhat niche pick on Split, and one that both teams struggled to deal with on attack due to the sheer amount of time a defensive Sage wall can buy you if you don't break it early. It also led to some funny moments, like on round 32, where 100 Thieves copied Sen's defensive wall the round after they used it. Overall, this map was absolute cinema, and I would absolutely recommend you going back and watching it. Overall, Sen looked better than they did last week, and perhaps more importantly, they look like they are improving as a team. Jerwin, though not lights out as a duelist, was a good player and had a great debut for a rookie, playing his role well and taking lots of space for the team. It is important to Sen that they win this week's game, as it will likely decide their playoffs chances, and they seem to be favoured given that they are facing EG. As for 100 Thieves, I'm not quite sure about the direction they're going, as they seem to be going away from enabling Cryocells, their best player, to be in a role where he can take over the game, such as playing Chamber or Jet, something that would lend to this team and something that they need if they're going to do well in this stage. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe so I can buy more skins.